You might remember that at the beginning of Lent, I suggested that Lent is a homecoming. A homecoming is where we feel most ourselves, where we can center our lives, where we have a sense of who we are and our identity. I noticed that the Holy Father was very keen on going back to his apartment. He wanted to return from the hospital to go home, realizing that healing could take place there. And that image of homecoming is so very powerful for us as we think about this season of Lent and what it means for us. Today in the Gospel, we see that the image of Jesus coming to the midst of the people with his mercy is where, in fact, homecoming really takes place. Notice that they gather around Jesus, not in the temple itself, where all the various pious practices are done and performed, but rather they come to Jesus to experience his mercy. That, I think, is so very important for us to consider as well during this season of Lent. We take on various pious practices of prayer, fasting, and almsgiving, and all of that is so very important. But they have to lead to bringing us to where Jesus is with his mercy and to experience his mercy in our lives. And we get an idea of how we can really understand whether or not we have experienced that mercy in this gospel text that we see here today. Notice that those who want to condemn this woman show no mercy at all. They do not have a sense of being compassionate for a person who is struggling in their life, who's treated unfairly. She's the one who's brought forward because she was caught in the very act of adultery, which begs the question, where was the partner? It was a system that was unfair, and there's no compassion or mercy for her. And so too in our lives. A good test of whether or not we really experience the mercy of God in our lives is whether or not we show it to others, people who are treated unfairly, maybe who need a second chance, who need an opportunity to begin again. Do we give them that opportunity? Do we easily forgive them and also forget? Or do we hold their faults against them? It's important for us to experience the mercy of God by, in fact, giving it to others, making sure that others also have a second chance. But there's also something interesting about this reading from the Gospel, because at the end, Jesus sends her forward. He sends her out and says, "Sin no more." He gives her a new opportunity to look at life differently. She doesn't have to go back to her old way of life. Things can be new for her, much as we hear in Paul's letter to the Philippians today, where he says everything in the past is like rubbish, and he can move forward with a sense of hope about his life, that something new can happen to him. And that sending forth also is about letting go of one's past, realizing that the sum total of our lives in the past are not the sum total of what we've done in the past, but rather the Lord gives us a new beginning, something to start all over. I imagine this woman going back into town had to deal with a sense of shame about her life. People would look on her differently than Jesus looked on her. And she had to reject that toxic element of shame that so often invades our lives. That's important as well, that when we experience the mercy of God, we have to let go of the shame of the past, which can be so debilitating. Today, then, as we continue our journey in Lent, it's an opportunity for us once again to realize that it's not just about pious practices, but rather it's an opportunity to come to Jesus and experience his mercy. And we'll know that, in fact, we have experienced that mercy when we can give it to others, show them compassion. But also when we can see that the moments in the past of our sinfulness can be put behind us, and there's a new future for us to begin again, and to put aside any temptation to live in shame of the past that can so easily paralyze us. That's why that final phrase in Paul's letter to the Philippians is something for us to meditate on in these days. He said, "It is about forgetting what lies behind, but straining forward to what lies ahead. I continue my pursuit toward the goal, the prize of God's upward calling in Christ Jesus." May we make his words our own.